All right. So 200mm f2. This is a lens configuration that has like a legacy around it. It's like a legend. In fact, if you even say that lens around longtime photographers, they kind of all perk up because they know what it's capable of. They know the look you get out of that kind of lens. But they were around during the DSLR era. I mean, we're talking about Canon EF mount, Nikon F mount. We haven't seen one designed or come out for today's mirrorless until now. Sigma has put out the 200mm f2 DGOS sports lens. Yeah, well, I don't own any more E mount or L mount, and that's what it is for. So I adapted it to Nikon Z mount. Needless to say, stick around. We got a lot to talk about. What's going on, everyone? Seth Miranda here, coming from my studio here in Manhattan. I'm a pro photographer here in New York. If you're watching my channel, you probably already know all that stuff. You've probably seen me on a bunch of other channels, but this one is my own. And Sigma was very cool and reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to take a crack at that 200mm f2 DGOS sports lens that we put out? And I was like, absolutely, yes. I mean, I heard about this thing coming down and I didn't get a chance to do a first look video or anything for any other channel. So this was very cool of them. I will say right off the bat, this is not sponsored by Sigma. They did not pay me. There was no money exchanged hands at all. I do not get to keep the lens, and they aren't going to review this video before I put it up. So it was very cool of them to just be like, hey, we just want to see what your thoughts are on this lens, and that's an honor in my book all the time, especially with a long-time company like Sigma, who we're going to get into that, like what they are as a brand as well, because I think that can't be understated as well. What I want to say is there's a lot of videos out there about this lens. I'm sure, this has been out for a little bit now. You've probably seen endless, reviews pointing at lens charts and showing you bokeh balls or bokeh balls, whatever. I'm not that guy. I'm going to give you some kind of insight from how I worked with it in a few different situations and setups, what I looked to get out of it, what I did get out of it, and what it was like to adapt it. And I do want to also specify that any performance issue, most likely, if not definitely, came from the adapter, okay? And that's something we have to talk about as well when we get into that part of this discussion. Sigma does not guarantee performance with, 18th party adapters, and that's totally, understandable. What I will say is I did mess around with this lens on native E mount on a few Sony cameras, nothing major. I wasn't like setting up a shoot or whatever, but I was just trying to see if there was any behavior differences, and I do believe there were. I will also say that having shot Nikon Z primarily for the last few years, I do know the behavior of the autofocus system and what I get with native lenses, and there was a difference as well there. Is it enough of a difference? Is it a problem? We're going to talk about all of that. So let's get into, first of all, what's up with the 200mm f2? Canon came out with a 1.8 version once. It was massive, huge. And they had an f2 as well. Nikon had a 200mm f2 that I got to use when I was assisting for a guy a million years ago. And then they put out a version 2, and I went around chasing that lens thinking like it was just amazing, and any longtime photographer that has switched from DSLR to mirrorless and owns that lens, that's usually the one lens that they keep and they adapt however they got to from DSLR to, like with Nikon, you have the FTZ adapter. And it's one of those lenses that doesn't come up on the market as much, holds its value because of that. And it's one of those things that I was chasing on the used market, but I was either getting really banged up ones that were still at a higher price. And of course they're banged up, they're owned by pros. We use our gear, it's tools, we use it, it's gonna get wear and tear. I even got really close to buying one out of a used department, which looked pristine, but it had a kind of grating, and I was like, what could be the problem? As soon as I got that in hand and mounted it to a camera, it just started squealing like crazy, and I just said to myself, it's kind of not worth it. It's going to need servicing. And the bigger issue when people bring up like, should you adapt a lens like this from a different brand to this brand, or should you go with the older DSLR mount and adapt it with FTZ? The bigger issue for me with that particular lens was, we're not going to have a lot of parts going forward. You know, they are not being supported as we go forward in the world and in this era, and you have to keep that in mind. So even if I found one that I felt was like just perfect, at what point after being around for decades and having been used lovingly will it fail on me? So that's where my head was at, so I gave up on that search. However, for this video, I went to find one to kind of run side by side, maybe put one of them on a Z8 while this one's on a Z9. And boy, I tried. I called in a favor from the big man.
Hey Seth, what's going on?
Joe McNally. Man, have I told you how good looking you are? Like, I can feel it. Like you're getting.
Not lately.
Have you lost weight? I mean, I'm looking at. I can sense you lost weight. You feeling. I mean, you're around the globe like a 16-year-old. Look at you.
Yeah, right.
You're getting younger, right?
I don't want to do the math to try to figure out the last time I was 16. All right. Well, let's just get that on the table.
Well, I've known you a long time, right? I don't ask too much of you, right? Right?
Well, it depends on the day.
Well, how about today? How about I got a big favor to ask you, and you are welcome to say no because I know it's huge. But I also know you're a very generous and giving man, and I know you're who we all hope to be when we grow up, Joe. So just remember all that, you know?
Yeah, right.
So listen to this laugh. What a good-looking laugh. Unbelievable.
All right, give it to me, both barrels. What do you want?
I only need to borrow one of the most legendary unicorn pieces of equipment that you have, the Nikon 200mm f2, which I know you keep in a cradle next to your bed.
It is a unicorn of a lens. Yeah, sure, you can borrow it. It's I'm traveling internationally for the next month. I'm not taking it, so it's just going to be in the locker.
Joe, I couldn't hear you over how astounding your smile is. And wow, thank Joe. I know you've always been really generous to let me borrow gear or whatever, but this is nuts because this lens is really hard to get. And every time I've tried to get a used one, I think I showed you, one was like banged up. It was making all sorts of squealing noises. So this is really hard to get.
That's interesting because another guy I talked to, and I was just within the last week, said he had a bead on a used 200 f2, but it was making noise as it focused. And I said, "Be careful, man. Be careful." You know.
I think the grease settles or something. If people haven't, I mean, they're decades old, these lenses. So, but I remember every major shoot that I've helped you on, you pulled that lens out, and I know how much you like really lean on that lens for a certain look. Well, now I got to put it up against the lens that came out for mirrorless from Sigma. So I just want to see what's what and where things stand, because I got to adapt your lens from F mount to Z mount, and I got to adapt this Sigma from Sony E mount to Z mount. So we're going to see what happens.
All right. Well, I've got an FTZ basically on the lens because I don't even own an F mount camera anymore, right? So I keep an FTZ bonded to that lens because me being me, forgetful, I'll reach into the locker, grab a lens, and then I get into the field and I can't use it. So I just leave the FTZ on it so I can preclude that mistake. So yeah, you can borrow it. I'm leaving the country on Wednesday. Just got to figure out how to get it to you.
Yeah, we'll get creative with that. Have you felt the difference in the lens going from F mount to Z mount?
I'm honestly, and I'm not even necessarily wearing my Nikon hat here. No, it's just sharp as a tack, even with the FTZ. Well, you saw me use it with that saxophone player in the bar, remember?
Yeah, I remember that very well. I remember holding it in the rain in Times Square for you.
Oh my God, yeah.
But also, do you think that maybe the new autofocus system has changed the way it performs at all, or is anything like gotten boosted from adapting it to Z rather than degrading it?
I couldn't really say scientifically. I take it out, I use it, it's responsive. I mean, that day, honestly, I was shooting a Z8, if you recall, in that bar, and it was tremendously responsive, responsive and tremendously sharp.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't think I've used it since then.
Okay. All right. I mean, that lens is a commitment. It's big, it's heavy, it's expensive, and it's a certain look. And I think that's what people have to understand with 200 millimeter f2s. But you're the only guy I know that could get me one. I could not track one down in time for this video, so we'll get creative with trying to get it to me. If it can even happen, don't go out of your way too bad, you know?
All right. Well, let's stay in touch on text or something over the next couple of days, because I legitimately only have, these next two, 48 hours. I think Annie and I go to the airport Wednesday afternoon.
Jeez, okay.
And so let's figure it out.
Okay. So as generous as Joe was, actually being like, hey, take that lens, clearly we couldn't make that happen. He was on a time crunch. I was hectic. He's on the road, and, Joe, thank you so much for offering. But hey, it is what it is. I only have the lens for a short period of time, and I only have even shorter amount of time to actually make this happen. In fact, I'm filming this in between all the Comic-Con madness right here in New York. So if you didn't know, I cover all the photographer setups and media stuff at New York Comic-Con every year. And the video, I think by the time this video is up, it should be out. Either way, I'll put a link down below to the playlist for the past years as well. So go check that out. Self-promotion done. We'll move on. Okay, so before I get into what I did with this lens, let's do a quick walk around of what's going on with this thing. First of all, it is surprisingly lighter and smaller than I had expected. I remember the 200 millimeter f2 for Nikon F mount being a tank, and I've held it for plenty of people as an assistant. I have had it in my hands when I've shot with it a million years ago, and I can tell you this was like, okay, cool. And maybe that's the step towards the mirrorless eras, that we're able to keep lightening things up and they start figuring out new designs. It does feel pretty small for what it is. I mean, yes, the front elements are always going to be big on something that's a fast lens like an f2. This is a 105 millimeter filter thread size. I do not own any filters that are that big. It would have been cool to maybe see a back end filter, maybe a drop in or something like that, but some people do believe that a rear filter can degrade the image as opposed to being in the front of the lens where it gets polished up by the rest of the elements. That's a debate for another time. I'm not going to jump into that one, but that one might have been cool, but there are a lot of features to this lens. I mean, you've got custom function buttons at the edge of the lens where you can program it to whatever you want. You've got a lot of switches. Of course, the autofocus, manual focus switch, which is easy to grab on the fly, so you don't have to go through menus or any kind of buttons on your camera. You do have a focus limiter, which will limit you from 3 meters to infinity or 1.7 meters over to 3 meters. So if you don't want it to hunt all the entire range for whatever reason, if you're in a challenging environment, it does give you the focus limiting ability. You also have two types of stabilization on here. Usually when a lens has two types of stabilization, optical stabilization, I should say, it's usually one for staying stagnant and one for panning. And we're going to talk about that because something interesting kind of happened with that stabilization in this specific configuration. It does have custom preset switch, which means you can go from off, so that it's just like a straight up default, custom 1, custom 2. So you can actually set up the lens how you want it to be and just go quickly into it with a physical switch, which is cool. And you also get the D-click switch, which is really cool for people that want to have a smooth opening iris for things like video instead of steps, which if I put on the click, it will click through the range, click, click, click per f-stop, which some people appreciate one or the other. It's always cool to just have that option. But the one switch that I really appreciate is this, the lock for the aperture ring itself. Because if you're like me and you just want to have all the control in your camera for the front wheel, the back wheel, however you want it, you can do that. And instead of every time you grab the lens, you accidentally switch it over to f22 or f16 and wonder why your shots are so dark for the first few frames, or you miss something because of that, you can put it onto the A and lock it, which I really, really appreciate. You do get the foot, and it does have Arca Swiss on it. I appreciate it. You can totally remove it. all things aside, it's just like one of those things that's kind of good to carry around with a bigger lens like this. And I will also say that the lens hood feels super premium. It feels really well built, and it has a rubber gasket on the edge, as well as the lens itself having that rubber gasket, because ironically enough, a lot of times resting it down like this might be your safest balancing point for it to not get knocked, believe it or not. Or if you are just reviewing images from a sideline or something like that, it's nice to have something like that. Either way, I always appreciate on larger lenses like this to have the rubber gasket. So that's basically the physicals. Yeah, it's white, blah, 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 blah. There's a million videos, like I said, for this lens out there, and I don't want to get stuck on stuff like that. So I called in my girl, Erin, who is amazing. She knows how to pose. She looks incredible, always has cool wardrobe. She's a fashion designer. She also is a photographer herself, so she gets it, and I can work with her really easily. Never actually shot with her, believe it or not. I realized that when I asked her to come through for this, and she was doing me a total favor, so I didn't want to eat up too much of her time, and I just wanted to run through certain scenarios to give you different looks. And keep in mind, I'm using a 200mm lens, a long focal length in a studio and outside on the balcony, which is, I'm in a box literally here and I'm on a strip of literally out there, right? So yeah, I was, confined a little bit as far as the footprint goes of what I was working in, but I know what I try to look for in longer focal length lenses and shallow longer focal length lenses, because a lot of times when you have longer focal lengths, to make it an actually affordable lens, you're going to be looking at more closed down apertures more than not most of the time. But this is a pro lens. I mean, it's definitely built to be used in professional settings. It's a quality lens, and I totally felt it the entire time. What I will say though, is I was gonna go and do the typical thing. I'm not gonna lie to you. I was like, when Erin was coming through, I was like, all right, let me figure out some quick things I can put together. I ran out of here and I went down to Home Depot and I went to the fairy lights, the LED lights, the shelf right there. I'm not joking. I went like this, whoosh, and put it in a bag, and I went to go check out, and I spent a bunch of money. I kept saying to myself, like, they're going to want to see these bokeh balls, but I don't care. I don't care about the bokeh balls. And I tried. I set up, I was putting it around C-stands. I was putting in the foreground, the background, so I could see how he blitzed through them. And then I gave up on it. I was like, I am not feeling this. I don't want this. I don't like these shots. I just was like, whatever. So here is a beautiful example shot of that with these Apple boxes standing in for Erin. You're welcome. You are so welcome. Enjoy that. I use Apple boxes a lot. I know my friend Ab Cisse does as well. They have a good idea of what you get with skin tones, and you can really sculpt out light on them sometimes, but whatever. Anyway, that's just kind of like a little bit of a joke, but also not, because that's what the LED lights will look like out of focus. I don't know. People seem obsessed with that. I've never been obsessed with that. I do it for the lens videos, so I know that's what people want to see. And I also do it in my streaming setup at home. If you see me do talking heads in my home setup, it's got a ton of LEDs, like, because I know you guys like it, and it's kind of like, woo, Anyway, so I gave up on that. So then what am I going to try to do with this lens? Well, the first thing I went and did with this lens was I went outside. I said, after I get some shots outside, I can settle in here and kind of figure out my next plan of action. We got Erin out there. It was high noon. There was not a cloud in the sky. There's light beaming down on our ginger heads, and it was getting pretty crazy out there. However, what I would say with this lens is, while it's labeled a sports lens, longer focal lengths like 135, 200, 300, and they're shallow apertures, f4 or wider, I usually look at those lenses as, or 2.8 or whatever, as not sport lenses for my application, because I'm most likely not going to shoot sports unless I absolutely have to for like a video or whatever. You've seen me shoot sports on other channels. But for what I do personally, my work that I get paid for, my commercial work, what I do in the studio, this is more of what I call like kind of a fashion lens. And what I mean by that is I'm able to get kind of more or less a head to toe shot, but still separate them from the environment so that you're focusing on the wardrobe and the outfit and the product, and you can really get those kind of looks really easily when you are just step back, the camera's focusing on your subject, you've got that shallow aperture, but you're so far back, or at least far back enough that you're not looking at like one eye is sharp and the other one isn't and stuff like that. Like, no, you are at this perfect point of the amount of the model that you need or your subject that you need in focus is in focus, and everything else that is distracting but still gives an atmosphere and environment and doesn't make it boring, maybe gives some a little bit of a lifestyle kind of look, is still there. And that's kind of the way I approach the outside. The thing is, when it's high noon, I got to figure out a way to clean up that light, because we're not doing this. If you guys know my channel, you know that I care more about lighting than anything. So, and I truly believe that light is the most important thing, then lens, then camera. That aside, usually in a situation like that, I would just hold a board and kind of walk in there myself and reflect the light and kind of make something happen that way. Because the lens is so long, I would normally have probably an assistant run the reflector, so they can, as the model's moving, they can move with them and they can kind of visually see where they need to be reflecting that light with a whiteboard or a silver card or whatever. And I was so close to just throwing a board onto a C-stand and saying, oh, well, I hope this sticks, you know, but I just didn't want to keep on running back and forth trying to figure out if it's reflecting the light in the way I wanted to as a fill board, you know. So I went and had to make a decision there. What kind of strobe am I going to throw at her? And I kind of went two ways, because typical me, when it's not client oriented and it's up to me, I just do a million different looks and then I figure it out later. Well, I had two choices. I could either make it look like the strobe is the sun and kind of match the feel of that hard light. And I kind of did that with a Fresnel lens on the Profoto Pro D3 that I got back there. So I also am borrowing that from Profoto. It's a 1250 watt second light, so a lot of power. But we want to shoot shallow, so we got f2. We are in high noon, no clouds, lots of sun, and we're throwing strobe in there. This meant I was in high speed sync, because high speed sync, the real use case for that is a shallow aperture with a lot of ambient light. Because if I go to f2 and I go to my flash sync of 200th of a second or 2/5 of a second, I'm still gonna have an overexposed environment. So I was shooting at 2,000th of a second, and that was bringing down my ambient light. And then I brought in the strobe to fill in for Erin and really clean up the light on her. And so I did a few shots where we were, you know, hard light, and that's great. And then I said, you know what, let me figure a different type of look for her out to kind of soften it up. And that's when I brought out the Profoto 4-foot Octa. That is a silver lined version of it. And because the sun was high noon, I couldn't even do the trick, if you don't know this trick, of using the softbox to create shade for my model, and then using the strobe to fill in the shade that's on my model. Wasn't happening. So I have two looks. I got the hard light with the Fresnel, I got the soft light with the Octa, and I'm in high speed sync, bringing down the ambient exposure. But what about the lens? What about what's happening here? Well, I was getting the look I really wanted. It's got this really beautiful fall off, this really melt away depth of field going on, and that's amazing. And that's exactly what the kind of special feel that you want to get out of this lens. The other thing that you're going to want to pay attention to when you're using lenses, especially lenses that aren't the native brand, is the color space. Your color absolutely changes. There's plenty of like cinematographers, for example, absolutely know when a lens is going to be warmer, for example, and that's exactly what happened with this lens. It wasn't shockingly warm. It was just enough. It was just a little bit of a tint, a little bit of a beautiful warmth that really gave me great skin tones, really gave me a lot. I mean, you can see in these images, hopefully. I mean, every screen that's probably showing this video is doing something different with the colors, but I can tell you from the images themselves and having shot on that balcony forever and using strobe, which is, you know, calibrated light, it had just this little warmth to it that I really, really appreciated. It was very, very beautiful. The lens was beautiful. But what about the performance? Well, I recorded my EVF for you guys, and before you guys jump down my throat, I know that you're gonna see that I was on auto ISO. To explain why I'm an auto ISO, because I know some snobs are going to jump in my comments and be like, oh, what are you doing with the auto ISO? You don't understand. And some of you actually do, because you probably heard me talk about this before. But I have a hack that I do when I'm mixing ambient light and strobe, where I actually program a button inside the grip to kill my strobe and go record the ambient when I want to. The auto ISO, you know what? I'm going to put a link down below to a demo I did on this. It's a full demo on why auto ISO and how to mix strobe with existing light and how to go between shooting the existing light and how to shoot just the strobe. And that's why I did this. Okay, so I'll put a link down below. It was a presentation I gave on Nikon Stage at WPPI 2024, and it kind of does exactly the whole thing. So before you jump in my comments and yell at me about auto ISO, because I know it, I just wait for you trolls now. Go check out that demo, please. At least do me that before you start causing some problems, okay? Anyway, I recorded the EVF because I wanted to show you a phenomenon that was happening with the autofocus that I find happens a lot with adapted lenses. Not just this specific lens, not just this specific adapter, but just adapted lenses overall. There's something that happens when you're doing the type of autofocus where you have the entire frame up to the camera's decision to find your subject. Meaning in Nikon, it's all area auto, I think it is. And it's the entire frame, and then it's looking for the subject you have it programmed to. I have it on automatic for a subject, which is people or animals or whatever. And it's just an easy thing for me to program to a button so that if I'm working fast and there's like a dog that I think is cool, I can just quickly hit that button and it'll still find that dog or whatever. Anyway, if you notice, it'll focus on the background and it'll just get locked and stuck there until I tap that button again and go back into single point and make it focus where that single point is.
And for some reason, the manual focus override doesn't work with this adapter and autofocus modes, which I tend to lean on a lot to kind of pull focus back to a ballpark where I need it.
There's something that goes on with adapted lenses that once it acquires focus in a situation behind a subject, it doesn't even bother trying to look for the subject you're trying to shoot. And for a split second, I thought, okay, this might actually be because the lens is so shallow that Erin might be so out of focus that the camera can't negotiate that there's even a human there. But then I realized that's not it, because I've shot 1.2, 1.4, 1.8 lenses out there on that balcony, and it has acquired focus no problem and stayed with the subject. And even when I was off the subject and I pointed it back at it, it automatically grabbed the face. So I just have a hard time believing that that is a camera autofocus system issue, and totally something about the adapter. And I'm going to take this minute to start talking about that adapter really quick. The Megadap ETZ21 Pro Plus, this thing's awesome. This has performed phenomenal. In fact, it performed better than I thought it would. And I guess maybe I've been burned so many times by bad adapters over the years, but this had firmware like already ready for me that was issued a day before I started shooting or something. I forgot. I was like, wow, that's a really new firmware. And I updated this right away. Here's the thing. This is going to be kind of a discussion about Sigma as a brand and adapters and what third-party lenses really are, okay? So Sigma is kind of on a mission to be considered not really just a third-party lens and being grouped in there with the rest of third-party lenses out there that just kind of like put out stuff and hope that it works and stuff like that. Sigma tries to do it proper, meaning that they are working with the brands that they make the mounts for. So when you see Sony E-mount, they're not just putting a flange on there and writing some code hoping that it works. No, they're working with the protocol, the proper conversation, the dialogue that needs to happen between the camera and the lens. They're working with the actual proper lines of code that are needed to make that lens perform how it should perform if it just said a different brand name on it, you know? And I got to agree with them on this, because I don't think they want to play the game that some other third-party lens will do, which is put out a lens that you go, oh, this is awesome, and then you find a bunch of bugs while you're shooting with it, because what they're really doing is reverse engineering, okay? You save a ton of money. That's awesome. And you might even like the look out of the lens, and that's great. But performance-wise, you're gonna have to expect some bugs, because by the time they figure things out, they have to reverse engineer and put a firmware update. And you've got to remember there's a firmware update. If I'm a pro photographer and I'm leaning on a certain lens for a certain job or a certain look or whatever, which, yes, if you're a pro, you can pivot to other glass or whatever. But I'm not going to get into that discussion. But the reality is I don't want to think, oh man, you know, I updated the firmware in my camera. Is this going to bug out? Do I have to wait for the firmware for the adapter to get up there so I can go and trust this lens? Or do you really want to be in a situation where it's like a moment critical type genre like sports or dance or something like that, and there's just like a glitch? Like, That's what the real issue is when you talk about like an actual third-party lens brand, as opposed to what I would call kind of like a premium lens brand, which is kind of where I put Sigma. And let me just tell you, I actually got the chance to see Sigma's factory. If you check out the 300 to 600 millimeter video I did, it's out there on YouTube. We went to Japan and they walked us through the factory, and you got to see how many hands go into making these lenses. It's not just like slapping things together. No, they really are striving for a quality level. And some people group them into this third-party thing of low-cost lenses. But the reason they keep their costs down, and actually we get to benefit from having some pretty affordable, amazing glass out there, is because they basically own the entire process, from like getting the minerals to the whole way of making this lens. They are all in on it in that factory. So that's where I think there's more education has to happen about which brands do what, why they are at the price points they're at, how they do things at a lower cost sometimes or whatever. But for me, this lens, I got to tell you, when I heard about it, I was like, oh man, I know there's an adapter out there for it. In fact, the reason I know about this adapter is because someone I know that works at Sigma handed me her camera to try out a Sigma lens, and I realized she handed me a Nikon Z6 or 6.2 or something like that. And I'm looking at her and I go, don't you guys only make E-mount lenses? And she's like, no, we make E-mount and L-mount. And so I'm like, yeah, but why are you shooting like what? Wouldn't you want to own a Sony if you work at Sigma and you have access to all these lenses? And she's like, I like my Nikon. And she's like, try that adapter out, you'll see. And if you didn't tell me it was adapted, I just had that camera in my eye, I wouldn't even have known it was adapted. I was like, okay, I've got to pay attention to this Megadap adapter thing. So that's what kind of got me into this whole world, So I bought the adapter, never had a lens to put it on. Until now, I guess I won't once I give this lens back. So I'm gotta really think about it a little bit. But anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole here. Anyway, what I would say is you're always going to play catch up with the adapter for the firmware. And if you do change any firmware in the camera, you're going to have to pay attention to the adapter. So if you are leaning on a lot of adapted lenses, maybe hold off on updating your cameras till you know there's also an update for your adapter as well. That's where I would leave. Like, don't update it until you have to update it, kind of a thing. I know that with Nikon, when they do a firmware update, you get actual features, which is awesome, and we want to rush and get those extra features. But if you are going to invest into a lens that you are adapting, I don't care what camera brand or lens brand or whatever, just realize that that adapter is literally everything. And this Megadap is nice because it's very low profile. It's like a few millimeters. It's not like an FTZ adapter. It's like a couple inches because it's not compensating for a mirror box at all, which is great. So all in all, it just felt kind of pretty seamless. And one of the other things that I want to see is how a long lens that's this shallow handles foreground objects, because I think that's part of the optimizing of using these lenses, is that you can blast through foreground, whether it's fences or grass or whatever's in front of the camera, you're kind of getting right through it. And when I was shooting with Erin, I was going to hang some stuff from a C-stand, but the clock was ticking, the heat was building. Anyway, no excuses. I started using the edge of the building just to see if it could handle obliterating the edge of a building for me, then I know it could obliterate wires or whatever else anyway. So I did a bunch of shots with her like that. And also I got a bunch of shots of her a little close up, because one of the cool things about this lens is that your close focusing distance is under 6 feet, which is awesome. I think it's like 5.6 feet or something like that, which is nice. A lot of times with lenses this long, you can't step closer, and I have a habit of constantly stepping closer to subject when I shoot portraits, and it always sucks when your lens is the reason you can't get into the frame you want, especially if you're someone like me that doesn't like to crop, especially when you're using lenses that are longer or shallow, because your position to your subject absolutely affects your depth of field. So for me, the stepping in closer and framing not to crop, I'm using the depth of field as a tool rather than stepping back, shooting, and then cropping and getting the frame, but then there's more in focus than I wanted or something like that. Anyway, not going to go down that rabbit hole. Either way, it was just nice to see a minimum focusing distance that was manageable with a lens this long. I was really psyched on that. Another thing you're going to notice in this little bit of EVF recording is that the autofocus box seems to jump around a little bit as far as like eye detection or whatever. Here's the weird thing. Even though the box was jumping around, it still was sharp and stayed on her. So I think there's just some kind of like communication thing going on from the adapter itself that the interface is getting a little wonky, but it's not unmanageable. It's not distracting. It didn't make me lose confidence in it. It was nailing it one after another. Yeah, she wasn't moving like crazy, but it's enough for you to wonder if it's even going to lock in on her. And when you're shooting that shallow, you don't want any guesses or chances. You know what I'm saying? All right, I didn't even realize I didn't even talk about the shots we did in here. Yeah, this is what happens when you have a script. This is when you go off the top of your head all the time. And this is why these videos are so long, but I appreciate you sticking with me. So we came in here, and this is a daylight studio. It is white from head to toe. There is light always flying in here. No matter how much you try to block out these windows, it's always got a lot of ambient light in here, which is great when you want it, but you're fighting it when you don't. And I wanted to shoot shallow because I wanted to use the f2, and I really wanted to see in a controlled light setting what I'm really getting, not mixing ambient. I want to see the color I'm getting out of it. I want to see the tones I'm getting out of it, shooting some black and white. I wanted to really see what this lens is giving me as far as depth of field melting away, which you did get for a sense outside, but when you're in a controlled environment, there's just like, there's way less distractions in the frame, and you really, as a viewer, your viewer, even if they're not a photographer and they don't know what they're looking at, there's just this special feel and vibe to it. And I gotta say, this lens just really excelled, really beautiful. So when I came in here, guess what mode I was in? That's right, high speed sync. Well, interesting, because we're at 2,000th of a second the whole way, outdoor, indoor, and I had to be in high-speed sync in here, which was no problem. I'm using a 1250 watt second plug-in light. I had plenty of power. There was no problem. And that's another thing I kind of want to bring up is that sometimes with adapted lenses, your TTL freaks out. There's something that goes on with some adapters, some lenses, camera configurations that they don't talk well. And so if you know how TTL works, it's basically putting out a pre-measured amount of light going through the lens. The lens is saying this aperture that you set it to, and the camera's going, oh man, it's underexposed for the settings I'm at, and then the flash will go up and down in power to get you back to exposure. If you want to know more about flash exposure and what those numbers on the back of your flash means, check out the link down below for my what do those numbers mean on your flash video. Did pretty well, pretty psyched on that one. But regardless, because it's so much communication between so many different things, sometimes it freaks out. I am super happy to report the TTL was dead on. If I changed something, if I, whatever case, dead on. I was so happy with it. And it was dead on during high speed sync, which is another monkey wrench of information to throw into the mix, because in high speed sync, your flash duration is longer, you are pulsating, you are shoving power through that light like no tomorrow. There's another element, another thing to worry about. Well, high speed sync was fine, TTL was fine, it worked great. There was one moment where all my flashes just kind of shut off, but I think that was a me thing. I think I accidentally hit a button and everything went a little wonky, but I'm not going to blame that on this because I'm not sure. And it was after shooting a lot and with no problems. So just beware, maybe, there could be some issues for you, and check your firmware of everything, your flash, your camera, the lens, and now the adapter, right? So in here, I was like, let me go with some classic portrait. And I was gonna, because I had the Fresnel lens sitting around, I was like, let me just throw a Fresnel at her, see what happens. She has these really beautiful eyes, and Fresnel lenses on a light tend to have this ability to, Ab Cisse put it best. He's like, it homogenizes the light. It really cleans up the light, but keeps it hard. And a hard light, when hitting some really textured eyes, can really sing really well. And I was taking a few frames, but I just wasn't feeling it. In fact, here's a quick frame with the LEDs in the background with Erin. I was not into it, so we're just gonna get that off the screen really quick. I said, hold on, I'm going to stick with the hard light, but let me swap out the Fresnel. And I swapped the Fresnel out for a beauty dish. And that is the famous silver dented beauty dish. Thank you very much. And we got some really just beautiful portraits. I sculpted her really the way I really wanted to, fill board to really dial in that fill light. I mean, this stuff, these frames, what you are looking at is out of camera. I mean, all I did was export them pretty much. I didn't do anything to them. I want you to see what color you're going to get. I want you to see really what the lens is. I'm not here to retouch something when you want to see how sharp a lens is or the image quality out of a lens. Like, what's the point of that? I don't get it. But this is what you're seeing. And the only grading I did was on some of the black and white images. And I want to do the black and white because I do believe that some lenses do affect like some gradation that and that has to do with the color space that it's, if it's shooting warmer, then that affects the tonality of the lens as well. So I did some black and white with her as well. After I did the straight up portrait setup with, the beauty dish, and she looks amazing and love it. And you can see the detail just melt away from her jawline. When you start getting that like sharp hair going into the murked out hair, like it's so beautiful and it falls off effortlessly. When I say effortlessly, I mean there's no sudden stop, there's no linear look to it, there's no like suddenness to the fall off. It's just really, really beautiful, and that is what you really want. And because it's a 200mm, and because of my perspective to Erin, it really did sing for, or I should say her bone structure really sung. Nothing's warped out. That is really how she looks to me. This is what I want to see out of a portrait setup when I'm shooting. And I was very, very happy with this. And it stayed on focus. It wasn't doing the whole eyelash thing. And we're at f2, remember? Like you can totally notice when it's an eyelash focus and an eye focus. So really quickly, I was like, okay, I got you here. We did the portrait setup. Let me throw something together. I'll throw an octa in the sky and I'll clean it up and put some grids on it. And I'll shoot commercial white background. So I threw 2 extra lights in the background, B10X pluses if you care. And I just really, really quickly threw together that commercial white high key background look just to see what I would get out of that. And yeah, and I'm actually kind of pretty psyched on this because you can see she's wearing basically a white shirt and that exposure was dead on and it stayed that way, right? There was nothing that happened with the communication from the lens and the adapter freaking out my flash setup at all. Where it stayed where I left it, which I'm not making this up. I've had this happen on some adapters where it's just made communications with the flash freak out. Stayed dead on, and with white backgrounds, if you know and you shot commercially, you know that white backgrounds are like, you got to be pretty dead on with that. And the black and white looks really nice. You got a full tonal range on this. You got some details in that crispy shadow. You've got details in that highlight, and you've got a really nice gradation tone that just washes over, and you can do whatever you're going to do with it in post or whatever. But I just want to see what's going to happen firsthand with something like this, and I was very happy with it. Very, very beautiful. And it's funny, right? Like she has this amazing red hair and these green eyes also, and I'm just like, get rid of the color, but whatever. I gave as many setups as I could think of within what I had to work with in the short time I had. And I got to tell you that this was just a real pleasure to use this lens. And this was a really beautiful lens. And I got to say, if you're going to ask me, hey, are there any glitches? Are there any bugs? Are there anything that I should be concerned about? What I will say is, so far, with this specific adapter, there is a weird situation with the stabilization. So the optical stabilization, like I said, has 2 modes. Off, then it has basically staying still, and then so you can pan, basically sport mode or whatever. What's funny about it is, the stabilization, I think, goes into mode 1 when you click it to off, and then shuts off when I click it to mode 1. I would love to see this fixed in firmware Megadap, because when I tried it on a couple Sonys, it just worked the way it's labeled to work. So it's not the lens. That was a little weird. You are going to, once in a blue, it's going to go into the background and just stay there like I showed you on the balcony.
I also noticed that when I tried it on the Z8 to use the new focus limiter in body with the new firmware, it turned the autofocus into a snail pace, which I was not into. And that's got to be from the adapter.
If that is something you're worried about, that's something to keep in mind. I would hope it only gets better. What I would really say is this something to pick up. What I will say about this lens is I think it's a fair price, a good price for what it is, for the level that it's at. But for me personally, I have this kind of rule of, if it's going to be an adapted lens, I have to have a hard line on how much I'm willing to spend on an adapted lens. This, at the time of recording this, is over $3,000. At that point, I don't want to have anything up to chance of there being some kind of issue. The motors in this thing are great. It focuses crazy fast. It is there for me when I want it to be there for me. But the few percent of a times that it's going to go and focus randomly or not confirm focus or something, is that something you want to deal with? That's what you got to decide for yourself. For me, I would just, I'm in a place where I'm like, oh, maybe one day we'll see Z mount. Maybe one day we'll see this actually made for other camera mounts, Canon RS, Nikon Z, you know, and I have to basically hope that Sigma and Nikon get into a room at some point, sit down and just make this work, okay? And Nikon, this is to your benefit as well. If you want more people to adopt your system, let Sigma in, let these lens brands work with you to make proper lenses for what's out there, because people are going to want this stuff. They're going to want to be able to use this stuff. And I think it's only a matter of time till we see more third-party lenses across more mirrorless brands. But that's just hope. That's not definite, you know. This lens overall, optically, beautiful, stunning. Speed, there. The features I want are there. Maybe the drop-in filter is something I would have liked to have seen just in case, because that's a big filter. But I mean, I'm not sure what else I could have asked of this lens. I really am not sure. And before anybody says it, I did want to go out into the street and just shoot some natural light or whatever, get into some situations, but I have no one to film me. I'm doing self-producing completely on my own. And I didn't want to set up a tripod and let that run, and then I turn around and it's gone because I'm in New York City, or something happens to this lens that I do not own. And there was just so many factors that could go wrong. I just wanted to keep it as much self-contained as I can while I'm trying to film B-roll of myself, while I'm trying to shoot with Erin, while I'm trying to figure out what to really get out of this lens and what to focus on as far as things I should be relaying to you, and trying to pick up on things that might be going haywire or whatever. That's not, hopefully it don't come across as an excuse, but that's what this channel is. I'm doing the best I can by myself. So hopefully you guys can let me off the mat on that one. And before somebody says, why didn't you take it to Comic-Con? Because it is a madhouse and it's crazy, and I'm just not. Nope. I had to focus on doing that video and get out of there alive. I feel like I'm going on and on about this lens. It was a pleasure to use. It's optically great. I love the color that came out of it. It's a great lens. The question you have to ask yourself is, are you willing to adapt it for another system if you aren't in Sony E mount or in L mount with like Lumix or a Sigma camera or something like that? So you're going to have to, or Leica. So that's your decision. I'm going to say it's like 95% there with the adapter. But like I said, every now and I get so many firmware updates for Nikon. Would there be a time where they update something in the camera that I need, I do that, and I can't trust the adapter anymore? That's where I have issues. And that's it. And that's not Sigma. That's not this lens. That is adapters. And they are just doing the best they can to reverse engineer and keep up to speed with what they keep up with. Anyway, this video must be ridiculously long. I'm kind of ranting. I want to thank Sigma so much for lending me this lens. It was so much fun. Really, really beautiful stuff. I would love to keep shooting with it, throw it into some other situations and stuff like that. But for now, I think you guys got a pretty good set of examples here with me and Erin shooting outdoors, indoors with strobe, high-speed sync, TTL, all this kind of stuff. You can really, really tell the image quality out of it and what type of characteristics you're going to get out of a lens like this. And final note on that, if you are going to try to like mess with the characteristics and put a filter on here, just know 105. That's a big filter, and those are expensive. If you're one of those kids like, I'm gonna put a black pro mist on here or whatever, yeah, good luck with that. Anyway, I'm rambling. This has gone on long enough. If you are new here, hit subscribe. I want to see what you guys think down in those comments, but also, If you are looking for people just like you and not looking to be harassed by trolls online, I have a Discord that is completely free. It is over 1,000 people in there. And you can ask all the questions you want, share work, you can help people out, check out industry news. You can just be around other people that are just like you, that are from around the entire world. So 24/7, if you need something, pop in that Discord, ask a question, and I'll put a link down below for that. Make sure you go into the rules section, hit OK, it'll open up all the chats. You can follow me at LastXWitness on all social. Check out my work on Instagram. If you want to know what I shoot, how I shoot, whatever, you're going to find me on Instagram most than anything else. And don't forget to check out the Comic-Con videos, because I'm literally in the middle of doing them right now. I am exhausted. My ankle is still sprained. I am dying on my feet. But this was too cool not to, find an energy boost to come and do this. Erin, thank you so much for coming through. I really appreciate you, kid. And yeah, I will leave it there. All right, yeah, so I'll just leave it there. I don't know what else to add to this conversation when there's like a million other videos out here on this. Anyway, I will see you guys on the next one. Later.